Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Future for the Sport podcast here on Bowl TV. I'm Jason Overstreet, the Deputy Executive Director at Usbc. We're glad you could join us as it's an opportunity to be able to talk about some of the recent news from Usbc and other things around the bowling world. I want to welcome in our other guests, and the media members are going to be part of our roundtable today. First of all, Executive Director Chad Murphy is going to be with us to talk about some of the things that Usbc has announced and what's ahead in the future. We also will be welcoming in Lucas Wiseman from FloBowling, as well as Gianmarc Manzione from Bowler's Journal, and Tim Burg from the Above 180 podcast. Now, many of you are aware of the recent announcements this week from Usbc that include moving the Open and Women's Championships back to a September start date. And then as well, the really disappointing news that we had to put out this week about the cancellation of the Junior Gold Championships and other youth events this summer in Las Vegas, as well as a suspension of the Team USA programs, as there are not going to be, it appears, international events for the team to compete in. So all of those topics will be covered today, as well as questions from our media panel. So with that, I'd like to welcome in the group to join us here on the podcast and get started with the discussion. So Chad, as well as Gianmarc and Tim, and also Lucas now on the screen. You can see us across. Welcome from across the country, and Chad's case across town. Chad, if you would like to just start us off, with your thoughts on what's been really a whirlwind this week in the bowling world.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. I appreciate that. I want to also thank Gianmarc and Lucas and Tim for joining us today, as well as everybody that will watch this either live or across the social space over the next few days. Obviously, it's been an interesting 6 weeks, if you will, since we started really tracking this virus across the country and everything that's been going on. And we hope everybody is healthy and safe in the bowling world. I continue to talk to a lot of different folks, members, bowlers. Heard a lot of folks, connected to the Junior Gold Championships yesterday. To everybody I talked to yesterday, thanks for taking the time. But it's been a really trying time. There's certainly some folks in distress, and we know that. But know that Usbc is here for you. Either information, all of our folks are still working from home, as you see Jason and I are today. But if you need us in any way, feel free to reach out through the normal ways that you do, either through our website, phone, or email in all ways. But just want to say that we're thinking about everybody, and God bless the folks that are certainly having some struggles with this health crisis, and we're thinking about you. So with that, obviously, Jason kind of hit the high points of what happened this week, and we'll open it up for some questions from the panel. So again, thanks everybody for being here. We appreciate you taking the time.
So with that, members of the panel, I know there have been a lot of questions and a lot to cover, but open it up for just whatever is at the forefront of your minds.
Jason Overstreet, I actually had a question for you. I would like to ask you a question similar to one I asked Chad during his appearance last month on the Bowler's Journal podcast, which is, what has it been like for you as an executive, Jason, to help steer an organization through an unprecedented crisis like this one? Can you just reflect on that for us?
Sure, Gianmarc, thanks. The first thing I would say is just very emotional. It's just, you get into this business working in sports, because you love crowning champions. You love being out there to see the experience with parents and kids. And so to shift to where the focus is trying to figure out, how to still make that possible if you can, and realizing that in some cases you can't, but still looking to serve the members, do what's best for the sport, keep our team healthy, support all of their families. And so, it's something I've never experienced before, but we're just trying to do the best we can.
Yeah, I have several questions, sort of overarching questions about how this pandemic is affecting USBC as an organization. Chad, how has it affected USBC financially, and how will it affect USBC's bottom line moving forward? I know you guys are going to lose a lot of revenue from things like the tournaments having, potentially 70% less teams at the Open Championships. Can you just talk a little bit about what the financial impact is going to be for you guys?
Sure. Obviously, we're like any business. You certainly plan for a downturn, but I'm not sure anybody plans for zero like a lot of the bowling centers and pro shops around the country are. In USBC case, we're somewhat fortunate because we're a nonprofit of our size, has best practices that we adhere to, that our board oversees in terms of our reserve structures that are in place, both cash and reserves. The membership season, mostly complete, but this is certainly going to impact summer membership. And, those membership numbers and the revenue that comes from them will be down. And then we'll have to, seriously take a look at the fall and how this impacts that. From a financial perspective, we did also apply and have received approval on a payroll protection loan, which most will be forgiven. But I would tell you overall, USBC is in the fortunate position of really being in good health. As I always like to say, our financials are out there, our 990s are on the website for everybody to see, and there's a significant amount of reserve structure in place to handle something like this. To be very specific about, what you're talking about with the Open Championships, the Women's Championships, all of it, has an impact, but all of our folks are still on staff. We haven't laid anybody off, no furloughs. We're in very, very, very good shape and feel like we can weather this for quite a while. And that's really a credit to our governance structure, our committees, our board, but then also, the fortunate, member, David Paul Lewis, that put a dues increase up in front of the convention a couple years ago. And so we're kind of in the middle of that. When USBC plans, it's a 3 to 5 year outlook when it looks at its revenue streams. And so when you think about that, it makes it a little easier for us to absorb something like this. But I appreciate the question, Lucas, because I know a lot of folks will look at this and say, well, can USBC handle it? And the question is yes. We're in good financial shape. So thanks for asking the question.
Yeah, and just sort of a follow-up to that, you mentioned membership, and that most of the membership is already in for this season. Can you tell us? It's sort of hard to find this information out there in the public domain. Can you tell us specifically how many current adult members and youth members USBC has, and in addition to that, are you concerned that this pandemic might negatively impact membership starting in the fall?
Yeah, good question. The simple answer is we came through last year. It's in our annual report on the website, or will be shortly. I apologize. We usually post that at convention. Just under 1.3 million members, with about 125,000 of those being youth. And so when you kind of add that up, what does it mean? We track it on a weekly basis and have for years. And so the last 2 years, we've seen some favorable numbers. Normally we lose, between 4 and 6%. Last year, right around 3. We were tracking, 2.3, 2.4 this year, 2.5 until about 5 weeks ago. And then so obviously it'll tier up from there. Don't really know for sure what that impact will be into the fall. We're mostly focused on the summer right now, right? We won't know a lot until we see the bowling centers open. State governors obviously have that in their hands, and we'll just follow it from there. But again, well positioned to handle what we believe will be a little bit more of a decline than we're used to handling.
One more question, then I'll stop sucking all the oxygen out of the room for a second. What are your thoughts on how this pandemic is affecting the industry as a whole? And bowling centers are closed. Obviously, people can't bowl. They're not buying bowling balls. It seems to be having a pretty negative impact on the industry. What are your thoughts on that, Chad?
Yeah, I mean, I use the word distressed, right? And everybody that you just mentioned is feeling that. bowling centers, with no revenue coming in. We're all, filing applications for help. And in a lot of cases that's come in. I've talked to a whole lot of folks in the last 4 or 5 weeks. Everybody's saying the same thing, which is, better days ahead, but, weathering the storm is certainly going to be interesting because it's really not something that you plan for. But no different than, a lot of our members who have been laid off recently or out of work. And so, it's easy to say that, there's a lot of folks in distress. It's harder to say how and when we'll come out of it because obviously the virus itself is making a lot of these decisions right now. But we're thinking about everybody, obviously, as I know, everybody else is doing as well. But it's going to be a rough ride. But we are looking, towards that light and those better days that will come shortly.
Even with that payment protection plan assistance in place, though, Chad, there still seems to me to be a sense throughout the industry that there nonetheless are going to be some centers that don't recover from this. And that could have, as Lucas alluded to, depending on the number of centers that don't make it through this, a detrimental impact on the industry as a whole, perhaps directly on USBC and in other ways. Is there, in your view, Chad, or in your view, Jason, anything potentially that the industry might be able to do collectively to try and keep some of those bowling centers from falling off the cliff of this crisis?
I think it's no different than any other industry, right? We've got successful businesses out there. We've got businesses that maybe not quite as successful financially, and then we've got, some businesses that are, running with some smaller revenue streams. And so when you think about all of that in and of itself, who knows really how all that's going to play out? We're working with folks, working with BPA to process information. I think BPA has done a wonderful job of working, with the information that's coming out of the government, SBA, and the loans to, try and help. Beyond that, I think the answer to your question, Gianmarc, really lies in how long this takes before we open back up. Yes, we've heard a lot of conversation about how, folks might not be opening their doors. And I think that's a reasonable conversation. To say how big a problem that is really an unknown at this point. And so, everybody will continue to manage their finances and be thinking about how all of these things might impact. But then, the key is going to be is when we turn it back on is to make sure that we're networking and understanding, and those folks who are in more distress than others, we do what we can to help them and think about it, as we go through the process.
Tim, would you like to jump in?
Is regarding the USBC Open Championships that are, that have been pushed back, I guess. I'm sure the oil pattern was already set that you guys had planned on using. And so this is for either Jason or Chad. Has that pattern then been altered, or are you guys coming up with a pattern just based on the fact that now there'll be less lane play on each of those patterns than what you guys had anticipated originally?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. Obviously, we've been supremely focused on, the virus at this point and the social distancing measures that, we will probably have to be under. We've built a variable structure, if you will, in moving it down to one team per pair. And then even the squads, 2 team squads on one day, 1 team squad on the next. But we've got time to really get more of a handle on what the pattern will be and those types of things down the road. Yes, you're right. We did have the patterns in place, and we will take another look. But we're several months away now from being cranking up the tournament and having our members come in and compete. And there just are a lot of things that still have to happen so that we can understand exactly what it's going to look like. The social distancing guidelines, how many people want to come and bowl, right? We really don't have a firm grip on the tournament size at this point. We really appreciate everybody that filled out a survey 2 Fridays ago, which was nice. because it really helped us understand whether they wanted to bowl in July and August, whether they wanted to bowl in September or October, whether they wanted to bowl at all. And so we've built the structure of the event around 4,000 teams with one team per pair, knowing that we can put that second team on every other day, get to 5,000 teams, but then also run the tournament longer for up to 7,000 teams. And that all came from the surveys. But I appreciate the question, Tim. That the pattern will be worked out when we, see really how many teams we have, how many will be on a squad. Who knows what the physical social distancing guidelines. Our goal was to get down underneath 250 people in the building. If you think about the way those guidelines were rolled out, it was initially 1,000, then 500, then 250, then 50, then 10, then stay at home. And that happened very quickly. But all the competition elements, will be on our list once we kind of understand more the size and scope of the tournament. Thanks for the question.
Chad, how do you think going to one team per pair for nationals impacts the integrity of the event? Some would say that it actually increases the integrity. Some would say that it might negatively impact things. Did you guys talk about that? I assume you did when making this decision.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the great thing about having, as many people that are passionate about this tournament, you hear a little bit of everything. And, even in, whether we should be having it, you've got this group, a majority that say they want to have it if the health experts will allow it. And you've got this other group that, but I think from an integrity perspective, it's different, right? One pair, and Lucas, you just said it better than I could. Some folks are going to say there's a little less integrity. Some people are going to say more because you don't have 10 guys carving up the pattern. And most of that conversation takes place in the regular division with a pretty small group in terms of eagle hunters, eagle chasers, however you would define the group that's chasing an eagle. For the most part, the larger group, really it won't have as big of impact. And I gave a couple seminars on this where I talked about the ecosystems of the championships, and that 80% are in one group, and then 5% at the high end. And I would think that that 5% on the high end, it'll be a little harder for them to say carve it out, while at the same time those are your better players, and so they'll find a way to build the pattern in a way that they think is best for them to score. But from an integrity standpoint, I think we're in uncertain times, and I think everybody understands some of the decisions that are having to be made. And I think the best part of this, at this point in time is we're still in a position to be able to operate the championships and crown some champions and celebrate some eagle winners. And if we, had just made the decision, even when the May 1 and May 23rd dates, it would have just been really sad, I think, to not be able to have an opportunity to run the championships. And there's lots of conversation and lots of talk about why we're doing that. Jason said it best earlier. We're in the service industry. We service our members, and when it became clear to us that we had, the majority of the teams that wanted to come bowl the championships, it was easy to make the decision to move the dates back and try to find a way. And we'll try to do it, traditionally with some of the same things, but it'll look and feel like a different championships, again, depending on what the social or physical distancing guidelines are as we get a little closer to the event. Squad rooms, how many in the building, how early you can get into the building. We left the schedule so that there was no overlap. So again, we could keep a small number of folks in the building as opposed to a larger group. How many people are going to be able to watch? All of that is a piece of this new world, and we're considering all of it. But I appreciate the question.
How about at the local league level, Chad? If there are local leagues in which a center or a league decides that for the purpose of social distancing, they're just going to have one team per pair. If that eventuality comes about in at least some, if not maybe a lot of centers, when leagues are able to resume, will the USBC find a way, maybe within its rules, to allow for those scores to count toward things like honor scores and records, et cetera?
Yeah, I appreciate that question, Gianmarc. I spent an hour on the phone with a proprietor the other night after we launched the Open with the one team per pair, and that was the conversation, because this particular proprietor is in a very distressed state and is also looking and thinking about ways to operate under these new guidelines. We've got a few things that we're working on and talking about, but things as simple as a team bowling on one lane and then having an empty lane, and then say that's on lane 1 and 2 and then lane 3. Our rules don't necessarily allow that at this point, except for a breakdown. And so we're having conversations about, modifying our rules under these extreme situations to allow everything we can and be as easy on the field of play, if you will, in terms of the structure to find a way within these social distancing guidelines. We fully believe there'll be states, that are kind of up and running, maybe not in the same light that we were before, but we want them to be able to operate under their local governance. 50 states and the territories that we operate, if you think about it that way, everybody's going to have different social distancing guidelines. And so we want to be as easy as we can within our rules to allow everyone to be able to have that experience. So I appreciate that question.
Chad, there are a lot of comments I see in the live comments just about Junior Gold Championships and the difference between what was involved in the variables of being able to have the option to shift the Open and Women's back to September, and whereas Junior Gold just really didn't have those same kind of options, and just a lot of differences. Could you share a little bit of that? Because I think that that would be good for folks to understand.
Yeah. There's just so much to it, and I just start by saying, when you go into trying to make these decisions, we still are a 50 state offering in the territories too, and so when you look at it, today there's over 12 states that have their shelter in places that go through May, with one into June and several May 15th or beyond. When the CDC gave us the date, I think it was on March 9th, of 8 weeks, we really thought we were going to be able to wait and make this decision, somewhere around mid-May. But then when you watch the governance structures push those date downs, it just became more difficult, to be able to really think about it. And also the state of Nevada and those conversations that go with it, because they're certainly going to be under, some social distancing guidelines. I really appreciate the way the folks at South Point, Stations Casino and Boyd and everybody was communicating, because they were helping us understand, whether it was even possible to run an event in July. And it just became to the point where when you really thought about it, we were going to have to pick and choose who could come. I don't think there's a realistic situation that we would have been able to run a full event with all of the kids. When you think about 12,000 people in a venue, it just wasn't reasonable to think that there weren't going to be some social distancing guidelines in place, that there weren't going to be some states that probably weren't out from under some of the distress that's going on. And so then we looked at postponing the event to the specific question. And, do you postpone it a week? Because that's not going to change a whole lot. Do you postpone it 2 weeks? That's probably not going to change it a lot. As soon as you turn the calendar into August, you have schools starting back up in some areas of the country. And I know that there are some areas of the country where that's not true. But again, this event is for our entire United States. And so then when you start thinking about that, we run an event where we take kids out of school that have mostly been already out of school for 3 months. What does that look like? And then when do you do it? So if we had postponed it to, mid-August, I still don't think we would be in a situation to run it. And then mid-September, then October, Thanksgiving was a week, that we had conversations about. But when you think about all of the unknowns and everything that was going on, and then you think about the financial distress that the country's under. And then you get to our bowling centers, not being open. I don't want to say this was an easy decision, because it wasn't. This isn't something that anybody at our campus, anybody that was on any of our committees or conversations want to do. We love that tournament. We love everything about it. We love, walking around and having conversations at the trade show, the opening ceremonies, but then crowning the champions. We really feel for our seniors, the folks that will be graduating out of the program. The folks that are really kind of hurt the most on this are the ones that are essentially at the top of each age bracket as you move up, because that's the year where they probably would take advantage. But we looked at this in a lot of different ways, and there really wasn't a good way to postpone. But more importantly, in thinking about, certainly the health and safety of everybody involved, the social distancing guidelines that are still going to be in place, it just wasn't feasible to run it, nor did we believe it was the prudent thing to do, to try to run it or postpone it under the conditions that are currently with us.
Chad, a lot of people. Sorry, go ahead, Tim.
I was just going to say, regarding a lot of those social distancing guidelines, are those something you could see being the new normal when it comes to bowling, junior gold, any of PWBA events, open championships, both men and women?
Yeah, I mean, they're certainly in top of our mind at this point, because if you really think about what's going on, the scientists and the doctors, which I'm not one, but obviously we're following it very closely. It's just so much different all over the country. A local county, here in Texas and in rural Texas, might look somewhat similar to one in Montana, but then, get into, New York City, and everything's just exploding in New Jersey and up in Detroit, in Louisiana. So everything's just going to be different. If you look at the way, the federal government yesterday kind of laid out these new guidelines, there's really no dates on the start, but it did give some structure. And I think what a lot of the governors are doing in working together regionally is really, really smart. And I've enjoyed, listening to some of that conversation and trying to understand it. But yeah, in some areas of the country, social distancing until we get a vaccine or some medicine, a lot of talk about antibodies. Until some of that comes into play, it's just going to be different all over the country, and we will have to manage it. And we know, the great thing about our industry and our sport is we've got so many great operators that are in tune with local governments. We know everybody's going to do a good job. We'll just, work to find ways to support each of them in the different ways that they're going to have to go about it.
Chad, a lot of people are asking both today and asked me yesterday when this was announced that we were doing this this sort of press conference to ask you if you'll consider extending the age requirement so that those who are going to age out of junior gold can bowl their final junior gold. And that's a difficult question, but are there any plans to look at that?
Yeah, we talked about that, Lucas, in detail, and the aging out thing is interesting. And, as was in the FAQ, there are no plans to change it. All the things that were in place before this coronavirus are still in place. And so to, arbitrarily, include a group or grandfather a group in, if you think about the athlete development structure, to put a time frame on that, I could make lots of examples back into high school sports, to other sports that take place. It's just not really as reasonable as a lot of folks think. And I know there's a lot of emotion to it, and we're thinking about all these kids that are impacted as well. But at this time, there are no plans to look at extending the age requirements or an extra year of eligibility for all the same reasons that go on in the world of sports, schools, and competitions.
Chad, do you think there might be any interest whatsoever in the creation of a kind of one-off tournament devoted exclusively to senior college bowlers who've been disenfranchised by this pandemic, and as Lucas just mentioned, people who are aging out of the upper divisions in things like junior gold, to maybe a one-off event, invite those particular bowlers down to have some kind of a championship tournament experience, since they have been stripped of the opportunity to have that experience in a more conventional way?
Yeah, I got an email yesterday that was in that same light, and it's certainly something that I'm sure a lot of folks will want considered, and I'm sure a lot of folks will think about. And I think that there's lots of local opportunities for things like that. On a national basis, I wouldn't even want to consider or think about it until we're in a better place and understand the medical, the health risks that might be associated with it. Because as soon as you say, hey, yeah, I think that's a good idea, we'd like to do it, okay, when? Right? And there's just so many unknowns to what's going on. And again, I've said this a few different times on different phone calls. And so just to be consistent, when the CDC gave us that 8 weeks and into mid-May, I felt really good about having time to be able to plan a lot of things. But then all this noise kind of shifted up that some folks would define as noise. But there for a little while, we couldn't assimilate the noise, right? Because there's so many differing dates around the country. And this is impacting locals and states differently. So even if that were something we would consider, we wouldn't know who would even be reasonable to compete in it until some of those things even out, until a majority of the curves are flattened and the things that go with that. And so while it sounds like a good idea, and those folks that know me best always say, well, he's a guy that really does think all things are possible. I believe that there's better days ahead of us, and I believe that we will be looking at ways and thinking about all of these things for quite a while. But until we get a better understanding of what's to come in the next, say, 60 to 90 to 120 days, I'm not sure we could even consider something like that. But I do appreciate the sentiment and the question.
Chad, for those who are going to be they're going to lose the opportunity to bowl their last junior gold this year, have you guys given any thought to perhaps organizing a special squad at the Open Championships to give those players an opportunity to maybe at least compete together one last time?
Yeah, one of the great things about junior gold, and I know a lot of people discount it, but I know it's right in line with that question that you're asking, Lucas, is the social aspect of it, where there's so many kids that come there, and families from other states. It's really an experience like no other, and it really is amazing when you really look at 5 different families in a hotel lobby ordering pizza and thinking about whatever they're talking about at that point in time. And so one part of it is the competition, right? We have this high level group that wanted to have a chance to win this championship. And the other side of it is kind of what you're hitting on, which is experiential and the relationships. It's another one of those things that we'll have to consider looking forward. Obviously, we believe that through the athlete development cycle of someone being a youth player, the way we position these age divisions, there's a lot of relationships. I think that we'll see over the years a lot of these kids that form teams and bowl the Open Championships together, just like you suggest. So I'm hopeful that this isn't, say, one last time, but all things are on the table. All things would be considered. We'd love to have a group within, Open and Women's Championships that was constructed that way. But I'm not sure now is the time to really, think or form it. It's going to come with a lot more answers in the marketplace. But I really do, Lucas, I appreciate the question, because it really goes to something that's so important about the junior gold experience that I don't think a lot of people get. You really have to go and see it to truly understand what an unbelievable experience it is that happens in all sports, bowling being no different.
Curious if you guys could discuss the PWBA. And I know this guy, things are on hold for them, but just if there's any news, and then even if they do get back bowling, what sort of lead time are you guys expecting to give the ladies before they'd have their actual first tournament?
Yeah, one of the things in all of these decisions too is athlete training. We've been watching, USOC and are in, communication with them and how the other sports are managing this, and they're not even, considering training at this point. And if you follow what happened with the Olympics being postponed and some of that, so playing at that level, certainly, we've got to get bowling centers back open so folks can go in and train. I got asked this question the other night on a call. I've been asked this question a lot. PWBA, one of the things I will tell you that is really incredible for me is how many people are concerned about that, Tim. And so I appreciate that, knowing that we didn't have a PWBA tour just a few years ago. It makes me really proud to even get the question. But the answer is kind of in the same place as the other ones, which is, we've got to watch some of this play out, understand the social distancing guidelines. We have 3 scenarios, if you will, that we're looking at. No different than, scenarios for the Masters, scenarios for the Senior Masters. We just, have to get in a place where we, the calendar has to move. We've got to get, that important testing done in these markets so that we can understand even where we could go for these events, if you will. But we're going to continue to follow it. I had somebody ask me, well, why aren't you just, making a decision to cancel the PWBA? And I said, well, if we made the decision today, we probably would have to. But we're lucky on that one because, that's not a decision that we have to make today. It's postponed. And when we know more, we'll take a look. It will absolutely be a condensed schedule. There's no doubt. I said this on an interview a few weeks ago, asking, 13 weeks on the tour as the calendar moves, throughout the year, there's just, less opportunity, but we're going to keep that one open and try to figure it out as the, calendar becomes a little more friendly.
If the PWBA doesn't start in the summer, is there no option to get it started later in the year, in the fall, perhaps? Or I know a lot of your members probably don't have the opportunity, or from a work standpoint, to bowl in the fall. But is that on the table?
Yeah, I mean, those decisions will be made obviously in conjunction with talking to all the stakeholders. Can, the health of the bowling centers and what will that look like, and will they want it? The players, the collegiate coaches to go back to school. What is their schedules going to look like? There's just so much to this. Is there an opportunity in the fall? Yeah, certainly. Is it, running a smaller event with less players? Not because we dictate that, just because that's what it would look like, because everybody's going back to work, just like you said. There's just a lot of unknowns, but, I can totally see, a possibility of still having a significant amount of tournaments. I can see, a couple majors, but we'll be talking to the players themselves. We'll be talking about talking to the bowling proprietors once they know more about their operations. We're working with the PBA on some of those other events, and Fox Sports will certainly be involved in the scheduling of that. And so there's just a lot to it. But yeah, all ideas are good ones at this point.
Chad, what is the likelihood that the USBC Masters will be held this year?
I wouldn't want to put a number on it, but I think they're all up to the health experts and the scientists at this point. We've been working with Tom Clark and Coley at the PBA, and they obviously have some things that they need to finish as well. I'm not sure exactly in totality of that, but I know some information came out that we would finish this year or next. I don't really know, Gianmarc, is the answer, but we have every intention to hold those tournaments when it's safe to do so. In some cases, it could be into 21 as well. We had a conversation about the senior tournaments and where they're currently scheduled and would it make sense. It's just all an unknown, but we have every intent to operate those, crown a champion for 2020 when it's safe to do so.
Does the fact that golf already has scheduled its Masters to be held in November provide USBC necessarily with any frame of reference whatsoever within which to make its decision about its own Masters event?
No, I wish it did. I think we could schedule a date, and I think we could be hopeful that we could hold it. And I think we'd still be, following the same, line of thinking as they are. I like what the PGA did personally, because it'll certainly get some sports on TV for some folks, which I think will lift the spirits of some folks around the country. In the fact that they're going to run those first 4 events without spectators, and then they'll make a decision on whether to extend that or not. And then they've got the majors in the later in the summer. But all of that, even though it's been scheduled, is still up in the air. For us, with a tournament like the Masters, even some of the PWBA events, we've got partners with television too, which is going to be a pretty crowded space too with all of these other events. But we'll do what we can to be collaborative and work with everybody on what's in the best interest of bowling, with the health concerns being a part of that. And Gianmarc, I'll be very specific about your question if I can. The fact that they got it scheduled helps. It's certainly not a bad thing. But does it rush us to, finding a date? And again, I don't want to give, a whole lot away in terms of thinking, because it's really just what's in my brain right now. Fox Sports, the PBA, we'll all be working together on it. But, as an example, we had the U.S. Open in the fall the last few years. There's a space there to do it. There's weeks around it to do it. But I also, in saying that, I wouldn't necessarily pigeonhole it into the point that it couldn't be later on or even after the first of the year, if that's what the doctors and the scientists suggest.
Has there been any talk to move any of the events that have to be rescheduled from an area where things are a little more of a hot spot to an area where things aren't as bad? Or is that even possible?
Yeah, I mean, again, everything's on the table when it comes to that. I love some of the out-of-the-box thinking that's going on in the other sports, and certainly following it closely, and not quite understanding or wouldn't presume to have an opinion about what's going on in those rooms. But I think everything's on the table. Once we get a little more structure from the government, including the governors in the states, and we can see, where and why and how and what it's going to look like, we can move pretty quickly to some of those decisions. It's the ones that we didn't have the options that we don't. If you see what we did with the Open Championships and the Women's Championships and moving to the fall, we believe there's going to be an opportunity for that. Otherwise, we obviously wouldn't have done that. But we want to give, every opportunity to, be able to have these events while at the same time thinking about the safety of our athletes, our staff, and any fans that might be in attendance, if that's even possible. And you think about the way we operate tournaments, right? I mean, just really close your eyes and think about it. The last PBA or PWBA event that you were at, even going back in the old days when we had a top 24 and there were breaks in the pairs, we're built to be able to do this within some of these social distancing guidelines. We just need to, get a few breaks in the calendar to understand what dates are possible. So again, I hate to, oversimplify it, but it really is that simple. We just need to understand more, have some days on the calendar break, and have some of these decisions about when these shelters in places will be lifted. And then we'll know more to be able to, really get serious about those dates and locations.
I'd like to ask a question of Jason and Chad both. I'm curious as to what each of you as an executive has learned about crisis management from this whole experience.
Jo, you want to take that one first?
Sure. I mean, I think that, you learn that you can't plan for everything, because this certainly is something that was difficult to plan for. But also, you learn sometimes what a great team you have. Our team was really willing to be flexible. We've shifted different customer service units to make sure that the Open and Women's Championships Customers have been receiving timely responses that they needed to reschedule and take care of things. A lot of folks working overtime to make sure our staff could function remotely. All of our phones transferred to where customer service is. So, a lot of that's been really encouraging, and just tremendous support from our board, and great engagement there, to try to keep providing what our members need. So it's been challenging, but we feel really fortunate, and just honestly great support from our membership too. I mean, when we're sending out these surveys to our Open and Women's Championships captains to look to try to understand what's best for them in this crisis, what's best for their family, what their teams want to do. Sometimes, we like getting peppered with surveys, but they've been responsive. They've been, incredibly gracious with our staff and understanding. And so, that's been really gratifying and interesting to see so clearly too.
Yeah, and I'm glad Jo went there first with the team. I think that there's a few words that I would, stick to. One being, it's amazing how resilient people are, and how willing, everyone has been to learn and understand. We moved really fast inside of our building to put everybody in a work from home environment to be safe. I mean, literally, Thursday when we pushed, everything back, the collegiate sectionals, we were already having folks, pull computers and laptops and take them home. And our staff has been so resilient. So the first thing I would just say is, when you think about crisis management, having good people around you is so important. And our team has just been amazing. And some of the real successes within that. And, I won't talk about names necessarily because everybody has been impacted by this differently. But if you extend from our staff to our board, to our members, even folks like the travelers at our tournaments, and having to move them home, knowing that we're going to want them to come back, just the resiliency of everybody to understand the gravity of the situation and pitch in. For me has been amazing. And then, the things that you learn through the process and the things that surprise you through the process and the things that you think might be true, you find out, whether certain things are true. And I think that's a real, amazing, spirit. If you think about faith and trust and how that, happens, our members have really responded, as Jason said, but when we sent these surveys out on the Open Women's Championships, we have no idea. I mean, none. We essentially cut a month off the tournament and then another 3 weeks. And we're talking to these folks. And really all we're saying to them is, hey, go take care of your families. Don't even think about this, right? Just make sure everybody's healthy and safe. Don't even think about this. We'll be here when you're done. And then, to have this amazing response to the surveys to give us, enough information to be able to make some of these decisions, but then to have our staff be willing to take it in. We're going to learn so much from this in so many ways. I've been really proud of our industry, even the conversations I'm having with some of the leaders, a lot of the things that the companies are doing. It's just how resilient people are, I think, is the first word I would use in terms of that. But then how much we're willing to take in and learn through these processes. But nothing better than a good team, and our team all the way down to local association leaders. You wouldn't believe some of the things that are going on locally around the country that, all the tournaments that had to be moved or postponed or canceled that were literally right in the middle, Pepsi championships. Really proud of everybody, but there's just so much to take in and how fast it happens.
Chad, the USBC Open Women's, as we mentioned, is scheduled to start in September. Have you guys talked about sort of a drop dead date to make a decision as to whether that's going to go forward? I mean, obviously it's going to depend on what's happening with the pandemic, but is there a date where you will say, hey, either we're going to push this thing again, or we're just going to cut our losses and cancel it?
Great question. I appreciate it a great deal. we don't have a date at this point, but we will. If you think about how these things progressed, we were in just get all the information we can mode in the beginning to, okay, let's make some initial decisions. And then we were hopeful that those decisions would play out and there would be folks bowling at our championships, already. And excuse me, not already, but May 1st, then May 23rd. And then the next set, when all of that went on, we came back and said, okay, what are our options? And July, August came in, and then September. So we've been in the mode of just, figuring it out. But now that we're at the back end of the year, right, that's kind of the last, time in which we can run it. And we've had such an amazing response of people that want to come. I think it's safe to say that if the health experts agree that it's reasonable, that we'll have enough folks to have it make sense to have a championships. And so the last thing I said on our call earlier this week when we all gave it the go, literally when we got off the call, I just kind of informed everybody, we had a light conversation, that the next step was to do exactly what you're suggesting, Lucas, which is, okay, let's get through and listen to everybody in the next 2 weeks, because there's going to be an onslaught of people moving around, right, of going into the system and moving their dates. Some folks moving out to 2021, some refunds. And so let's really dig into the customer service and let's make sure that we're servicing the customer over the next 2.5 or 3 weeks. Then we will get serious about what that date might look like as a go, no go for the championships in the fall. And hopefully over that same 4, 5, 6 week period as we're doing that, some more of the country governments, locals will have some more information to factor then. So I would tell you a month from now we'll be in a better place, but probably more like 6 weeks from now to actually putting a date on that, whether it's a go or a no go. So I appreciate that because it's in line with the way we were thinking it. But customer service right now, service everybody so that they can think about other things, and then we'll get to that when that calms down a little bit.
What is USBC's guidance for leagues that are trying to figure out how to distribute prize funds, given that their seasons have been cut short?
Yeah, great question. We posted a lot of information on bowl.com. There's a COVID-19 page, and there's a section in there that's leagues and tournaments. That's a full FAQ with everything in there. I think a lot of folks want us to make decisions for them. And so a lot of the folks that I've talked to, you wouldn't believe some of the conversations. There's one side as a proprietor talking about, lineage and expenses versus, prize funds. But we've put out a whole slew of information that the rules department working with association services. And so I would encourage everybody to go to those links and kind of follow along some of the FAQs, because all the information's there. If you have a question that's not there, which is still happening a lot, send a note to rules at bowl.com, and somebody will get back to you shortly. The simple answer on the leagues is, there's got to be common ground between the league and the proprietor. There's, league contracts that are assumed. There's league contracts that are on paper. All of it is, in an environment that we've never really dealt with before, right? And I keep saying this, we know more about, what happened in the 1917 and 18 in the 50s and the 60s, and more about swine flu and SARS and H1N1. But when it comes to these leagues, it's really going to come down to relationships with the proprietor, with their customers. But USBC is a resource, not necessarily a decision maker, because we consider it a state of the emergency. And so the information that's there is for everybody to use as a research. But I think good common sense will come in through most of the country, and there'll be good collaborative efforts. We've had, bowlers that are donating, some of their prize funds to bowling centers because they know, these bowling centers are in distress. We've got other areas in the country where maybe the relationships weren't as good, but it's a big bag if you think about all the things that are going on inside of it. But we're happy to help as a resource.
So back to the Open Championships, with the surveys that were out and then came back, did you guys have the data on how many people returned those? Were they your higher average bowlers? Were they the lower average bowlers? Did you guys get that information from them? And then who were the people that replied?
Yeah, we didn't necessarily do that with this survey because we were trying to keep it simple. It was just a 2-question survey, so demographics were not part of the survey. But the good thing is, our folks on the tournament staff know, a lot of these folks. And when the survey went out, there was a whole press of emails that came in too, if you think about that. And so I would tell you, generally speaking, we put some of the data, the 63% and the 30% in the FAQs, and so that's there. But there has been some assumptions, I think, that are being made in the marketplace that we've been hearing. I haven't even seen them, but I've taken emails where somebody says, well, this person said this, what do you think about this? The folks that are going to come to the Open Championships are all up and down the scale. It's across all 3 divisions. If you think, 40% is a regular division, 40% standard, and 20, which is the bottom group. I don't know what it's going to look like, but I would tell you from the feedback we've gotten, I would be surprised that it wouldn't look similar. I hope that answers your question.
We've been talking about a lot of the uncertainty, Chad, and how there are so many variables that we don't have any certainty with, given the unprecedented nature of this situation. But I think one thing that we're being told by the scientific community that we can be certain about is that there will not be a vaccine anytime soon. Based on what we're hearing from the scientists, it's going to be a good 18 months before a vaccine is developed. So if the Open Championships and Women's Championships proceed in September, and a single participant thereafter comes down with coronavirus, is that going to be your Adam Silver moment, Chad, where the tournament is swiftly canceled? What is your thinking in the face of the potential for such an eventuality?
Yeah, and I appreciate the question, Gianmarc, and I would put it to you like this. Every morning I get out of bed, and the first thing I'm looking for in the news is antibodies, vaccine, treatment. It's literally, I'm scouring the internet looking for that, because I do believe that's the piece. The vaccine's going to take a while, but if there's a stopgap within the medicine or something that's used as treatment, but this all goes back to testing. And again, I think that, the testing's going to evolve in the next few months. And as long as it does, I think we'll be able to operate and not necessarily be in fear of that, if you will. The Adam Silver moment is something that I think every sports organization is thinking about right now. If we think that's possible, we would have to consider whether, we could move forward with the event. It's just one of the failure points. But if the testing evolves and things move forward and there's productiveness in that space, we would have to get to a point where we were enough confident that enough folks were identified and the tracing was in place that we could move forward with it. And so that's one of the reasons why we moved the tournament back as far as we have, to allow some time for more testing to take place, more folks to get back to work, more time to see if there's an uptick in cases after the economy starts back up again. But your question is very relevant. The only thing that I would say is every morning, brother, it's what I'm looking for in the news. And there's a lot of news, and you got to kind of figure out what you're looking for. But that's one of those ones where I don't mind a lot of conspiracy theory because there's hope in it, right? When you think about medicine and those things that go with it, we're just all praying for that. And so, 412 this morning, I'm scanning the internet, and there was a very positive piece out of one of the labs this morning, not about a vaccine or a cure, but some medicine that is certainly providing some folks some help. But I wouldn't, be irresponsible and talk about that and suggest folks to go do that. I'm just, trying to answer your question in a way that makes sense. But It's a very relevant question. It's why the decisions, while very, very difficult in the beginning and postponing the event, were really easier than I think people realized. Because what happened with, Rudy Gobert, it changed the world. It changed everything that happened in the world. And so now we're all thinking more responsibly about that. It's why Gary Bettman is thinking about what he's doing. You're here in Arizona and Florida and Arizona for baseball games. I can't wait to, turn the TV on and see the St. Louis Cardinals marching towards their, another world championship. But at the same time, everything that you're saying is very relevant. So I appreciate the question.
I think too, Gianmarc, what you're going to see over time is there's going to be some standards for sports that are set, some uniform guidelines. It's something that I've heard discussed a lot on regular conference calls with the USOPC. And so there's just something that those medical experts are needing time to work on, whether it be the federal or NCAA medical directors. And I think those guidelines, will present a roadmap for ways to be able to operate, but also potentially, on what situation do events then need to be postponed, paused, or shut down, depending on test results. So that's part of what's tough in all these questions of people, understandably wanting more certainty about when and under what circumstances. But those experts are working collaboratively to put together guidelines for all of us, so that the last thing that would be responsible would be for Chad Murphy and Jason Overstreet to be making guesses about health decisions. We're waiting for that expert guidance to come, and then those will be the standards that we operate under.
Yeah, I read a great story yesterday that talked about the major sports and how they're going to come back. And it's just so fascinating. And again, it's all still unknown, but there's so much collaboration in it. And I think that is an important piece. But, we heard no fans, then, fans 10 seats apart, then fans 3 feet apart, then a vaccine. Who knows whether that would, be the way that it happens and the way that it rolls back. But it gives us some hope. For sure that there's a lot of folks in collaboration thinking about it, just like there's a lot of collaboration around the medicine.
Chad, can you talk for briefly about the USBC convention, what the status is? I know that there was a proposal either last year or the year before that would have allowed for virtual participation in the convention. Is that something that USBC will take more seriously moving forward, given this? And because I think it offers a more inclusive opportunity for people to participate in the convention. And I think that is something that could have been very useful in this time. Obviously, nobody could have predicted what was going to happen.
Yeah, I'm not going to speak for the delegates. Obviously, the delegates will make that decision, if it comes back through the legislation. We believe very much in the governance and the legislative process, where somebody puts a piece of legislation forward, by September 1, and then it goes through a process, and then it lands at convention and our delegates vote on it. And so the answer to that question really resides with the delegates, and we support the decisions and serve at the pleasure in those areas. And so that'll play out, as it does. As to convention, I appreciate the question. We'll have some information out in the next week or so with an update on convention, towards, what's going to how we postponed convention. Is the way it was communicated, and will still be postponed. But we'll have some information next week on that. We're still working a lot of that through the governance.
So if convention can't happen in person, it just can't happen. Is that correct?
Well, yes is I think the simple answer to that. But again, we're still working with our volunteers through the governance process, and there'll be a lot more information on that that comes out next week.
How, if the convention doesn't occur, how in what way, if any, does that affect board appointments, and term limits and stuff like that? Does that all just get pushed back a year?
Yeah, there's a lot of options, and again, at this point in time, I would only answer the question by saying, I think this is one of those things where I think people think I make a lot of these decisions. It's just not true. We work in collaboration with our boards and the Legal and Legislative Committee, our Executive Advisory Committee, and we're going through that process right now. And I do expect a lot of the answers to those questions to be in place next week. Okay. I said this on the last call, we've been on speed dial, with our volunteers for the last month or so. Normally the board meets 4 times a year. We've met 4 times in the last,
couple weeks probably.
Yeah. And then, throw in a couple executive advisory calls, legal and legislative meetings is meeting on Monday. There's a lot going on. And then, a lot of it was, started with, hey, what are the options? Right. And so there's legal to it as well. And so, there's lawyers involved in everything when it comes to, bylaws and everything that goes with that. But I appreciate the questions on convention. If everybody can be just a little bit patient, I'm hoping to have some information for everybody next week when we finish the process within the governance.
There have been a lot of allusions to phone calls in this podcast, Chad and Jason. I'm wondering if you guys can give us a sense of just how much more time you have spent on the phone in the last maybe 4 weeks than you were spending before this pandemic hit.
Oh my gosh, like phone calls, like with J.O.
I can tell you, I spend a lot more time on the video conferences than I've ever spent,
Yeah.
and that might include some of the Bowl TV live streaming in the past. But it changes your communication method when you can't see folks in person. For sure, everybody's experiencing it. But it's also, the phone calls are important because we need to hear what's going on outside of our quarantine area, what's going on in our local associations, what's going on with proprietors, how are our athletes doing. Certainly a lot, but it's important. It's productive.
Yeah, and I would just say, Gianmarc, I'm a guy that spends a lot of time on the phone anyway, right? Whether it's because I still do believe in that in a big way. But I would say all of the time at this point, whether it's text, phone, or video conferencing, our IT guys, our infrastructure folks just did a tremendous job of getting us up to be able to operate the business from home. And but then how you extend that, the emails that come in from members, I've had some wonderful conversations in the last few weeks. And some folks, people, wondering about our staff and the people that they talk to, or they got off a call with our staff and, wanted to share some thoughts, but then also industry leaders. And, most of that takes place through text. But yeah, it is, we keep using this new normal, but I actually, would really welcome, a lot more of the phone to be used at times than we do today, because I think, personal relationships are so important. But yeah, it's been, all day, all night.
Mm-hmm.
Well, gentlemen, we're happy to keep on continuing the conversation. We've been at it for a little over an hour, but certainly if there's anything else that's on your mind or that you've noticed from the live comments that you'd like to put in front of us, we're here as long as you've still got things that feel are unanswered.
Better be careful with that, Jo. I could do this all day. I have thousands of questions I could ask.
I do know that you're a veteran of being able to fill the microphone time for hours and hours. But we're happy to take a few more if you've got others that are on your mind, or go right ahead.
Yeah, no, I think I'm good for now for the sake of everyone's sanity and needing to get back to the other business of the day. I'm sure you guys are very busy as well.
I was going to say I'm hesitant to consider what a Lucas Wiseman marathon might look like and feel like. So, yeah.
All right. Well, with that, gentlemen, really appreciate your time. Certainly appreciate everyone who's been watching the live comments or providing live comments and has been watching across our platforms. Chad, any closing words before we sign off for the day?
Yeah, I'd just like to thank, Gianmarc and Tim and Lucas. We appreciate you taking the time, spending this, little over an hour with us. Appreciate all the questions. Gives us an opportunity to, push some additional, kind of background information in the marketplace about why some of this goes on. And so I just really appreciate what you're doing and taking the time to do it with us. So thank you. To, the larger marketplace, just everybody stay safe and healthy. We'll be here. I think there's better days ahead, and we're all looking forward to them. But no, we're thinking about you, and God bless until next time. So thanks, everybody, and hopefully everybody has a good weekend.
And I will say, Chad, I hope that you do more of these types of things in the future. I think that this is a good opportunity for you as executive director to come on and not answer necessarily our questions, but questions from the members directly, because I believe there is a whether deserved or undeserved sort of a feeling of a lack of transparency from USBC at times. And I think that this sort of helps lift the veil a little bit and makes people feel a little bit more confident in what the governing body is doing. And if not more confident, at least have a better understanding. So I think opportunities like this are good, and I hope you take advantage of them in the future.
Yeah, I appreciate the thought, Lucas, sorry. Yeah, I think, when you really get into the transparency, we process so much information. I mean, and it goes out through so many different ways. And then we get a lot of information back. We like this medium. We like this format. When we talked about doing this, we've had a lot of media calls over the last few years and have still done that. But, the technology is certainly advancing to the point where this is becoming easier and easier. And so we thought that this would be a way to, kind of start that. So I appreciate it. I always say the transparency is a tough gauge, right? Because in a lot of cases, when folks don't like, what the answer is, we talk about a lack of transparency, but in most cases they have the information. I think you can appreciate this because you were here, working at USBC at one time. For years, there's been information that has gone out. And then when people don't necessarily maybe like what they hear or those types of things, they say, well, there's a lack of communication. But our communications team works so hard to put the information out in as many different ways as they can. And our communications team is really, bigger than it has been in recent years because we've been trying to expand this, and Bowl TV is part of this. But I said it on an interview a few weeks ago. I just think the ways in which we're communicating within our sport has really grown in the last year and a half. And I don't know if you saw it, Lucas, but I pointed, your efforts on Flow as one of them. We talked about Gianmarc and Bowler's Journal and Tim, and really it goes deeper than that because there's folks that have been doing it for a long time. But these shows I think are important, whether we're doing them or whether you're doing them. But we agree with you 100% and want to, it's another touch point. I think we communicate in all the ways that we can, but this is just another touch point. So I agree completely. So anyway, with that, I again just would close by saying God bless everybody and stay safe and healthy. And we'll see you next week.
Thanks everybody for joining us. We'll be back again doing it again soon.